stay away from doctors and stay away from prescription drugs. We have a very special guest on today's Grace Unfiltered podcast. But before we bring him on, let me share why this topic matters so much to me. While in Los Angeles, my wife and I parked near a media company on Sunset Boulevard. What we didn't realize was it had a museum parking lot where we parked. We asked to park there, and I was invited in upon returning to say thanks for the use of the parking lot. And what we saw was jaw-dropping, an exhibit exposing the abusive practices of psychiatry around the world. I knew right then this was a conversation we needed to have. But it's also personal. When I was 5, teachers wanted me on Ritalin for being too active. My mother refused. She had me tested and found I am dyslexic. No drugs, just tutoring. Years later, after struggling with focus, I was diagnosed with ADHD and put on medication. It only made things worse. Racing heart, anxiety, and even AFib surfaced following that. That experience changed how I see mental health completely. I want better answers for this generation. It's not always about medication. It's about matching people with the right environment in school, in work, and frankly, in life. That brings us to today's guest, the U.S. President Emeritus of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, Mr. Bruce Wiseman. So welcome, Bruce, to the Grace Unfiltered Podcast, where we explore body, mind, and spirit through the transforming lens of grace. Although today's episode, we're going to be focused on the mind. What we found, it's very hard not to talk about body, mind, and spirit oftentimes, but today, and through these 4 topics we're going to be discussing here soon, we're really focused more on the mind and how the mind is used and manipulated. And but before we get into that, if you want to weigh in on what you just saw and heard about my intro and why I wanted you so bad in your organization, Citizens Commission on Human Rights, please comment.
Well, Timothy, thanks so much for having me. Your story is on the one hand is obviously very personal. On the other hand, it is a story that millions have experienced over the years after ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, was voted into the Psychiatrist Billing Bible, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So that label and the amphetamine-like drugs that they treat kids and adults with is a travesty in this country, and it's something that we at the Citizens Commission on Human Rights have been doing everything we can to expose and change.
Well, I applaud the organization's great work on this. I was, as I said on the intro, I was amazed, and like I said, it was a jaw-dropping experience, what is covered in this. And we're only going to be scratching the surface today, but how it's an industry of death. I mean, it makes for a great topic, especially this month, the month of October. But, torture and just so many terrible, egregious activities that people will say, that's saying it nicely, mad scientists in many regards, have done over the years worldwide in mistreating people and abusing them.
It is one of the most undisclosed situations in the country, and as you note, internationally as well. Although a major focus of psychiatric abuse is in the United States, but we find it, around the world. I'm going to be addressing the World Conference on Mental Health in a week or so. And there are people and I'll be speaking, there'll be people speaking there from, I don't know how many different countries, but this is a situation that is global, Timothy.
Yeah. And that was very clear going through the museum and even perusing this folder. But before we get too far, let's take the time, and I want to introduce you properly to the audience and the listeners. You, as you already mentioned, have testified before bodies of both houses of the United States Congress, as well as state legislative and judicial bodies in Colorado, Arkansas, New Jersey, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, and Florida. And you've also testified before an advisory committee on the Food and Drug Administration, President's Commission on Mental Health, President's Commission to Reform Special Education, National Institute of Mental Health's Consensus Conference on ADHD, which again is personal and hits home. And you have helped pass legislation in several states preventing children from being labeled and drugged in schools. You were also instrumental in passing a federal legislation that prevents schools from forcing parents to put their children on psychiatric drugs as a condition to going to school. As federal legislation, this protection is effective throughout the entire United States. Also, you have been on more than 800. I don't know how you have the time. I don't know how you have the time to do that, because as we read on here, you're going to say, how does this guy have the time to do that? On 800 radio and television appearances covering such issues as psychiatric, sexual abuse, electric shock, which is what this T-shirt's talking about, and I'll mention it now, undruggable, unshockable, unstoppable. We got this at the museum. And as an internationally well-known speaker, lecturer, you hold a master's degree from California State University, San Jose. And if that's not all, it says here that you are the former chairman of Department of History of John F. Kennedy University.
Yeah.
That's a mouthful, but I don't want to stop there. You are the author of a compelling book, and this is on topic, Psychiatry, The Ultimate Betrayal, and for 5 years hosted the acclaimed nationally syndicated radio show Take America Back. And if that is not enough, you've authored several books on finance and entrepreneurship under the name John Truman Wolfe. And you are editor and publisher of Strategic Financial Intelligence. Oh, and wait, one more. You're author of The Coming Financial Crisis, A Look Behind the Wizard's Curtain. Welcome again, and thank you for being part of this. We're so happy to have you.
Well, thanks again for having me. It's a mouthful as you read it. Of course, that isn't all in. That's stretched off over some years. It wasn't all like last month or something. Yeah. But I've had a busy and fulfilling life. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it. Now let's kind of move into the topic at hand, and that is psychiatry and the abuses. We're starting with involuntary commitment. Do you or could you set that up for us? And then we're gonna watch a video.
Well, just in a short overview, Timothy, psychiatry has the authority to pick people up and incarcerate them without their permission. It's the only, outside of law enforcement, it is the only certainly medical profession, if you want to call it that has that right. And I think the clip that will show the degree to which this is a massive human rights abuse. So I think the audience will appreciate what you're going to show.
Okay. Well, with that being said, I think you set it up. We'll go cut right to that right now.
Psychiatrists demand the absolute right to determine what is best for the so-called mentally ill. After all, the mentally ill are crazy and unable to evaluate their own treatment. To enforce their authority over others and keep their institutions filled at profitable levels, psychiatrists use a method called involuntary commitment.
When you go to a real doctor, say a family doctor or a cardiologist, a patient always has the right to refuse treatment. So there is no such thing as involuntary treatment when it comes to clinical medicine as practiced by real doctors. Psychiatrists, of course, believe that people can be treated against their will.
In 1956, psychiatrist Winfred Overholser presented a plan to Congress intended to take involuntary commitment to a whole new level. The plan: purchase 1 million acres of Alaskan wilderness, build a huge mental asylum, and change the commitment laws so that anyone could be shipped off with no more than a simple nod from a psychiatrist. The bill sailed through the House of Representatives, but when the public caught wind of the plan, they became enraged, referring to it as Siberia, USA. The bill was quickly struck in the Senate. But while the death of the Siberia bill put a stop to their large-scale plans, involuntary commitment still remained the most effective and profitable method for filling psychiatric institutions.
Again, the person has committed no crime and has no trial and is sent directly to a mental hospital, which is really a prison.
How many people go to an insane asylum and say, please lock me up? Doctors don't lock up anybody. Psychiatrists lock you up.
Even children can be taken from their parents with little legal recourse.
They just invaded our home. They came in with officers. Our kids were scared. They come in with pieces of paper and say, you're giving us your kids. And it's like, how can they just come in and do that?
She said, you could be arrested for medical neglect. And I said, but how is that when, this is my child? And I see that he doesn't need that much medication. Why would you threaten me with something like that?
At 10 p.m., 2 policemen and 2 social workers came to my house and took all 4 of my kids away.
Once committed to psychiatric hospitals, patients are drugged and restrained.
The more a person objects, the more this objection is construed as symptom of a mental illness.
At which point the person would be locked up in restraints. There would be the ankle, the knee, the waist, the head, the wrist, and the shoulder restraints. And if when that process was happening, if there was almost any resistance at all, the person then would be medicated to a point where they would almost be knocked out.
We had one case where they actually took a patient in a seclusion room and beat him up. And then they lied about it to the services that investigated. So it's a pretty wide range of abuse issues that we've encountered.
Psychiatric staff provoke their patients into violence so they can bill insurance companies up to $400 a day for each restrained patient.
A patient would resist diagnosis, resist treatment, and also want to leave treatment while they were at the hospital. And invariably, every time, that person's situation would be exacerbated until they were put in constraints and medicated, at which point there would be documented reasons to keep that person in treatment.
The burden of such claims is passed directly to the public in the form of soaring healthcare premiums. As for their victims, the experience is traumatic and even lethal.
16-year-old Rochelle Claiborne died in Laurel Ridge's care last August. The state report shows during the restraint, quote, Rochelle stated several times she could not breathe.
In almost all respects, the staff behaved appropriately, followed the standards.
By taking advantage of weak or vague restraint laws, psychiatrists and their staff are almost never held criminally liable for assault, battery, and murder.
He begged me to take him home, take him out of there, that they were treating him wrongly, and he didn't want to stay there. And I got a call that there had been an accident, that they held him down until he couldn't breathe anymore. I wish I would have listened to him, take him out of there before it had happened. And then I miss him every day. And I wish I could have him back, but I can't.
To this day, no one has been charged for the child's murder. The elderly are a prime target for psychiatric abuse, with treatment of senior citizens in mental institutions in the U.S. costing private and government insurance $4.5 billion a year.
Unwarranted commitment has occurred that wouldn't have occurred if the people hadn't had insurance. The proof of that pudding is generally in how fast they get out once the insurance runs out.
Involuntary commitment is a form of psychiatric slavery, where persons are treated as if they're property and they are deprived of liberty, and people are making money in the process.
As long as we have involuntary malhospitalization, psychiatry is a prison work. It's a crime against humanity. It is not medicine.
Every 40 seconds, someone is involuntarily committed to a psychiatric institution. And if you think this is something that can't happen to you or someone you know, think again. In the time it took you to watch this chapter, 10 people have been institutionalized against their will. And with hundreds of billions of dollars allocated to hospitals internationally since 1975, psychiatrists have carved out for themselves a lucrative commercial enterprise, hidden behind a dubious interpretation of the law. But far too often, psychiatrists commit crimes too blatant to be ignored.
Wow.
It doesn't leave anything to the imagination,
No,
Timothy.
It really doesn't. Do you have any comments on what we just saw that you want to make before I make any?
Well, it's a good question. I think the video shows it all. I think the one point that I would make is that while we work 24/7 to expose this kind of thing, to a very significant degree, the public is not sufficiently aware of the damage, of the torture, of the involuntary incarceration that psychiatrists perpetrate daily. So, I mean, I think that's, from my perspective, that's the big thing. It needs to be more broadly known so it's stopped.
Well, and yeah, absolutely. And we're doing our part, and that's why I really wanted to be helpful in any way we can to getting the message out.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned in the previous intro that I made it personal for my situation, when I was watching this, I found it to be very personal too. Clearly, they're from the United States. Number one, and number two, there was a little boy that had a Purdue University T-shirt on, so he's from my home state, where the Purdue University is located. So we're just emphasizing that this is happening here, not in some far country that's very archaic in their practices. These things happen and have happened here.
Yeah, absolutely. It is right here. Every major city in the country, psychiatric hospitals, although we get them shut down as rapidly as we can, there are a vast number of psychiatric hospitals, and their focus is on the bottom line. Most insurance covers an inpatient for 30 days. but the psychiatrist then looks at the insurance policy, and if there is some mental illness that the person can now be diagnosed with a new mental illness that'll cover them for another 30 days. This is because, Timothy, there is no science to psychiatric diagnosis. None. Zero. Zip. There's no blood test. There's no CAT scan. There's no urinalysis. And so the psychiatrist says you or the child has got ADHD or bipolar or this or that. It's simply an opinion.
A hunch or an educated, quote unquote, educated guess.
Yeah, a profit-driven educated guess.
Yeah. No, I understand. That's why I put it in quotes, because I've joked. A lot of medicine in general, not just psychiatric. There's a reason why they say they're practicing, right? They're practicing, and it's especially true in psychiatry. It sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, a few questions here. What is involuntary? I know we just watched it, so in case the viewer or listener has not picked up on what that means, involuntary psychiatric commitment, and what current proposals are there for expanding it?
Well, let me back up to the first question, which I think the audience just saw in the video clip. Involuntary commitment is exactly that. I mean, those two words. It's involuntary, meaning it's against the person's will, and commitment means being locked up. Jeffrey Shaler, in that clip, Dr. Shaler notes that it's like a prison, and Dr. Zaz said the same thing. These mental institutions are like prisons. And the psychiatric industry does everything it can, to get to the second part of your question, to expand their ability to do that. We go head to head with the psychiatric industry in various states of the country, where they're trying to expand the ability to involuntarily commit persons. In the state in which I live, the Republic of California, there is legislation that passed, I'm trying to think, it's been a couple of years, that loosens the laws on the ability for the state to remove a child without the parent's permission. And that is certainly involuntary commitment. No kid goes, lock me up, drug me.
Well, for sure. And it's terrible that in years past, or in recent years past, I should say, that parents seem more powerless in their children's lives, which is a travesty. And this is a glaring example of that, a terrifying, glaring example of that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a growing a condition whereby those oppressive elements in the state seek to take more and more control over a person's actions. This is particularly evident in education.
Which we're going to be doing later on. And we'll definitely make a strong point of that then, and really reinforce it then. But I don't want to let you... I want you to have that time if you have something you really want to say about it. But I know we're going to be covering it on our fourth show or topic.
No, that's fine.
Okay. So another question for you then. Why does the data show these programs fail to reduce homelessness or improve public safety?
It's almost a ludicrous question, because what they do is they implement treatments that are damaging, that will, if a person is in a psychiatric facility and let out, they have, without question, been put on mind-altering drugs, drugs that induce violence, drugs that scramble the brain. And if you know, if it's not the drugs, if the drugs aren't sufficiently damaging, they go to their fallback treatment, which is electric shock, which I know we're not going to talk about in great depth, but this is a treatment of psychiatry. Roughly 100,000 people a year get electroshocked in this country, generating billions of dollars to the psychiatric industry. So it's drugs or shock, Timothy, and it's no surprise that those so-called treatments result in a worse condition than a better one.
Yeah, that's something. You know, another thought came to mind because we had a pre-show conversation, and I was shocked since this question was framed in a homeless way. You mentioned when we were talking, and again, not to go down a rabbit trail, but I think it's important because I don't think we're going to be covering the military on these topics that we have planned, but how the military has drugs for, I guess, coping with TD and other things, or to numb them to whatever. And when they get out, they find themselves homeless because of drugs and because of, you know, you can take that and run with it if you'd like. I know I don't want to go on a rabbit trail, but at the same time, I didn't know that until we talked at that pre-show conversation.
Well, we have a DVD dedicated specifically to the drugging of the U.S. military, called I think it's called The Hidden Enemy, if memory serves me right. And these youngsters come back from, you know, going back a few years, Iraq or Afghanistan. They're given some unscientific psychiatric test. They're adjudicated that they're mentally ill, and they're put on psychiatric drugs. The number of suicides of military has skyrocketed, and we have done everything we can to expose the fact that what's causing that, in many cases, are the psychiatric drugs. These are drugs, Timothy, studies at Harvard, studies at Yale, studies at the State University of New York, all show cause violence and suicide. So these kids come back from being in a war zone. It's got to be traumatic for anyone. And then they put them on mind-altering drugs that make it worse. So
it's
anyway,
no wonder. So it's no wonder the suicide rate is so high in post-military service people.
Exactly correct.
And homeless, yeah. So I didn't want to let that go. We may do another podcast someday that's just specifically about that topic, but I thought this was a good time to interject it because of the question. So here's another question. How do forced detainment and drugging violate the process and human rights standards?
Well, I don't know. I'm laughing. I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny, but it almost
it's so ridiculous that it's funny.
It almost answers itself, right? I mean, you're taken against your will and thrown into a medical prison and drugged or shocked, or if you're a female, sexually abused. Surveys show that 67% of psychiatrists sexually abuse their patients. So your life and your liberty is at risk if you get in the hands of a psychiatrist. That's the simple truth of it.
I had asked a question whom I respect greatly, and I believe he was in his 90s. And I asked him, I said, what is your secret to longevity? I said, you seem very active, well into your 90s. And it wouldn't surprise me if he was in his hundreds, but he would not tell me his age. And I respect that. That's fine. And he said 2 things. Stay away from doctors and stay away from prescription drugs. Now, we're talking about psychiatric drugs, not prescription drugs. But I would imagine there's a pretty strong argument with other drugs, too, that aren't psychotropic or as well. But anyway, so another question for you. What are the long-term effects on those subjected to involuntary care?
Well, it's damaging. It's mentally damaging. I mean, I've talked to mothers and kids who have been in the system, have been involuntarily committed. It's damaging. It's mentally damaging. It's a point in life. I mean, there's nothing more basic, Timothy, to us as human beings is our freedom. Mm-hmm. And when there is an oppressive so-called profession that can take it away without your consent, it's mentally damaging. And I guess that's all I can say about it. I mean, I've talked to moms and young ladies, and it's a mess.
Yeah. And it sounds like, just reading between the lines, is it's in most cases, or many cases at least, irreversible.
Well, some people grow out of it faster than others. Okay. It's never going to go away. Mm-hmm. It happened. There is a memory of it. There is the involuntary loss of your freedom. You don't forget that.
Yeah.
So some people get over it, more easily than others, mm-hmm. but it stays with you. Like you say, it stays with you.
Yeah, I can't imagine. But yeah, it's like PSTD. I would imagine, if I'm saying that right, that the military has. There's trauma. They receive the trauma, if nothing else, that they were violated and abused, and it wasn't something that they had any control over. So it's not surprising that that would happen. And
yeah. I mean, the person has gone through a very traumatic incident in life. If they're in the military, if they've had to shoot another human being, that puts a mental scar on the person.
Yeah.
When people come home with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, it depends on the person. Some people just don't get rid of that.
Yeah.
And then they're put on mind-altering drugs that are tied to incidents of suicide and or violence. It just gets worse. And a staggering number of our military put on those drugs wind up killing themselves. It's a national tragedy, Timothy.
Yes, I'm glad that you said PTSD, because I think I got those letters turned around earlier. Hey, that's the dyslexia. So anyway.
There are worse things.
Yeah, there's worse things. But anyway, thank you for that subtle correction. So this is a very good topic, and I'm sure that we could talk a lot more. But I do want to at least give you the opportunities that we start to wrap things up on this first topic or this first show. So if anything else would come to mind and just wrapping it up, please take this time to do that.
Well, I think not to fall back on the video, but I think the video said it all, and we've kind of covered that. This is an ability that psychiatry has that no medical profession should have. You're going to throw the person in a facility. I mean, I'm not going to go into the various horror stories that I have run across in talking to victims of psychiatric abuse. I mean, some of them would make you weep, makes me weep. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a travesty, and the lack of care, compassion, mm-hmm. That a good doctor would have.
I know we don't have time to hear them all, but is there one case that really stands out in your mind that would really drive this horror or point on this topic home to the listener?
Well, there was we did some work some years ago in cutting back the use of mandating the reduction of the use of restraints on kids in psychiatric hospitals, and it brings to mind the story of a young girl. I think she was 12, if memory serves me right, and I think maybe they made mention of it in the video, but I was intimately involved in that case, and she was being mouthing off. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the psychiatric techs held her down and stopped her breathing to the point that she died, Timothy.
Oh my.
They killed her.
Oh.
And I spent some time in Washington bringing this to the attention of legislators. But she's not, that doesn't, I'm not trying to make the point this happens to everybody, but it's the kind of thing that goes on in psychiatric hospitals. If you were a fly on the wall of a psychiatric hospital, what you would see, I repeat, would make you weep. And that particular story is one that has stuck with me over the years.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And again, it just reinforces the title here. It's an industry of death. So I think that really drove the point home for this topic. And I want to thank you so much for speaking on that topic, and look forward to having you back for another one. And we will be talking again, and I'll do a little commercial for the next one: psych, drugs, and violence. So until next time, that's what we'll be covering on the next one. Thank you again, Bruce. We appreciate having you. And
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Only one can save. Jesus is his name. Christ alone.